What do you do when the person you love chooses their family over you, leaving you alone and pregnant, struggling to make sense of it all? What if, in the end, karma has its own way of making sure justice is served? My world came crashing down when Michael, my husband, chose his brother's lavish wedding over me, leaving me 9 months pregnant and alone. But little did Michael know, karma had a way of working itself out, and it had big plans for him and his family. My name is Emily, and I used to think I had everything figured out: a great job as marketing director, a loving husband in Michael, and a comfortable life. I was paying off our mortgage with my own salary, feeling incredibly proud of my financial independence. Family played a big role in our lives too. Michael had a younger brother, Nathan, and their mom, Eleanor, was always around. Their father had passed away years ago, so Michael and Nathan made sure to look after her, which I found touching. It made me admire Michael even more, seeing the way he cared for his family. At first, Eleanor seemed to like me. We'd chat over coffee during family gatherings, and she'd always ask about my work. Marketing director, huh? She'd say with a nod. Sounds important. I appreciated her approval. I wanted to fit in with Michael's family and be part of their tight-knit group. Our first few years of marriage were filled with weekend barbecues, holiday dinners, and impromptu game nights with the extended family. I remember one Thanksgiving where all of us crowded around Eleanor's dining table, laughing and talking over each other. "Pass the gravy, will you?" Michael's uncle bellowed. "You've had enough gravy, old man," Eleanor shot back, but she was grinning as she handed it over. I looked around the table, feeling a deep sense of belonging. This was my family now, too. But cracks started to show during a New Year's Eve party at Eleanor's house. I was in the kitchen refilling my glass of wine when I overheard Eleanor talking to Michael and Nathan in the living room. "Did you see what Brenda's wearing?" Eleanor snickered. "That dress probably cost her all of $5. I froze, my hands still on the bottle. Brenda was Michael's cousin, a single mom struggling to make ends meet. "I'm just saying," Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with disdain, "some people should know their limits. Don't try to play with the big boys if you can't keep up." My cheeks burned with embarrassment, not for Brenda, but for Eleanor. This wasn't the warm, welcoming family I had imagined. I peeked around the corner, watching as Eleanor leaned in conspiratorially, giggling with Michael and Nathan. As time passed, I couldn't ignore the growing unease I felt around Eleanor. What I initially dismissed as harmless teasing started to feel like something darker. And it wasn't just Brenda who became her target. At every family gathering, Eleanor would huddle with Michael and Nathan, whispering and snickering as their eyes darted around the room, landing on various relatives and friends, only for them to burst into muffled laughter. One Easter Sunday, I couldn't take it anymore. Eleanor was holding court in the living room, Michael and Nathan flanking her like loyal subjects. "Did you see Janet's new car?" Eleanor was saying in a hushed voice that was still loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably got it from the buy here, pay here lot. I bet she'll be paying it off until she's 80. Before I knew what I was doing, I stood up, marching over to their little group. "Hey," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't you think that's a bit much? Janet can probably hear you." The room fell silent. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, and she looked up at me. Well, she said with a sarcastic smile. "Looks like we've offended your delicate sensibilities, Emily." Michael and Nathan exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I just think it's rude," I pressed, my heart racing. "Why do you always have to put people down?" Eleanor's fake smile vanished. "If you don't like it, you don't have to listen," she sneered. "Why don't you go sit somewhere else?" I felt slapped across the face. I looked at Michael, expecting him to back me up, but instead, he stared at the floor, avoiding my eyes. "Fine," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "I will." That was the turning point for me. I could no longer ignore what had been brewing under the surface. Michael's family was toxic, and I had to make a choice. The last thing I needed was to be surrounded by people who couldn't support me when it mattered most. From that day on, family gatherings became a special kind of hell. I'd sit alone, nursing a drink, while Michael stuck to his mother's side like glue. He'd throw me apologetic glances now and then, but he never came to sit with me. "Why don't you ever stand up to her?" I asked him one night after a particularly awful dinner. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's my mother, Emily. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to tell her she's being cruel. I want you to have my back." But he never did. And slowly, I started finding reasons not to go to these family events, work emergencies, migraines, anything to avoid the cold stares and whispered insults. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. I was pregnant. I stared at the little plastic stick in my bathroom, my heart racing. 2 pink lines, clear as day. "Michael," I called out, my voice shaky. "Can you come here?" He appeared in the doorway, his face concerned. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, I held out the test. His eyes widened as he took it from me. He pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, I felt like maybe everything would be okay. Maybe this baby would bring us closer together, heal the rifts that had been growing between us. But life had other plans. The pregnancy was rough from the start. Constant nausea, dizziness, and a perpetual threat of miscarriage kept me on edge. My doctor put me on bed rest, which meant working remotely. As the weeks went by, my condition worsened. My eyesight started to deteriorate rapidly, a rare complication that my doctor said could be temporary, but might also be permanent. Squinting at my laptop became impossible. With a heavy heart, I had to quit my job. I needed Michael more than ever, but he seemed to be drifting away. He'd come home late from work, citing extra projects or drinks with colleagues. More often than not, I'd fall asleep alone, the echo of the front door closing jolting me awake in the middle of the night. The day of my C-section arrived faster than I expected. My eyesight had worsened to the point where the doctors insisted on the procedure. Natural birth was just too risky. As I lay on the cold operating table, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. "Where's Michael?" I asked the nurse, my voice trembling. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "Your husband's in the waiting room, dear. He said he'd rather stay there." The surgery went smoothly, and soon I heard the most beautiful sound, my son's first cry. As they placed him on my chest, I felt a rush of love so intense it took my breath away. Later, in the recovery room, Michael finally showed up. His face was a mask of discomfort and annoyance. "Look, Emily, I gotta say something. This whole thing, it's not right." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Normal women give birth on their own, without all this surgery crap. And men aren't supposed to be here for this. We should be meeting our wives and kids at home, like in the old days." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Michael, I couldn't risk." "Save it," he cut me off. "I'm heading home. This place gives me the creeps." The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Michael was hardly ever home, and when he was, he offered no help. Instead, he constantly complained. "Can you shut him up?" he snapped one night as our baby cried, his wails filling the silence of our dark bedroom. "I'm trying," I replied, exhaustion weighing heavily on me. "He's teething, Michael. It hurts him." But Michael was never patient. "All you do is focus on the kid. What about me, huh? What about our sex life?" I couldn't even process his words. Here I was, running on barely 2 hours of sleep, still recovering from major surgery, and he was worried about sex? As the weeks turned into months, Michael's frustration grew. One evening, as I was desperately trying to soothe our 6-month-old, Michael dropped a bombshell. "You need to go back to work," he said flatly. I stared at him in shock. "What?" But the baby. We'll hire a nanny, he interrupted. We can't keep living like this, Emily. We need the money. I wanted to argue, to say that our son needed me, that I wasn't ready to leave him, but the cold, determined look in Michael's eyes told me it was pointless. So, reluctantly, I began job hunting. Finding work with my limited vision wasn't easy, but eventually I landed a position at a smaller company. The pay, however, was far less than what I'd earned before. When I told Michael, his reaction was exactly what I feared. That's it, he scoffed. We're paying a nanny for this? My throat tightened, and I fought back tears. I'm doing my best, Michael. It's not easy with my eyesight. Excuses, he muttered before walking away. And so my reality was set. I rushed to work each morning, guilt gnawing at me as I left my baby with the nanny. I struggled through the day with my limited vision and came home to a resentful husband and a child who still needed me. Time passed in a blur of work, childcare, and tension. 2 years went by since my son was born. Despite the challenges, I loved him fiercely, finding joy in every milestone. But family gatherings remained a source of stress, especially when Eleanor was involved. She'd put on an act, playing the doting grandmother, but it was all a show. "Come to Grandma," she'd say, arms outstretched to my son, but he'd cling to me, turning his face away from her. Eleanor's expression would darken with anger. "What have you been telling him about me?" she'd hiss. "You're turning my own grandson against me." I tried to explain, exhausted. "He just doesn't know you well, Eleanor. If you visited more often." "Don't you dare blame this on me," she'd snap, storming off to complain to Michael. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, my heart pounding. Positive. I was pregnant again. Fear gripped me. My first pregnancy had been so difficult, and my health had been compromised. Could my body handle another? As I calculated the weeks, I realized I was already well into the first trimester. The decision, it seemed, had been made for me. With trembling hands, I called Michael at work. "What is it?" he answered, his tone impatient. "Michael, I'm pregnant." There was a long pause, then he responded, "Look, Emily, I'm busy. We'll talk later. Just don't quit your job, okay? We can't afford that." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling more isolated than ever. Thankfully, this pregnancy was easier. My morning sickness was manageable, and my vision remained stable. I continued working, determined to provide for our growing family. But as my belly grew, so did the distance between Michael and me. He spent more and more time at his mother's house, often not coming home until late at night. One evening, as I struggled to put our son to bed with my swollen belly, Michael walked in. "Hey," I said, hopeful. "Can you read him a story?" "I'm exhausted." Michael glanced at us, then at his watch. "Can't. I promised Mom I'd help her move some furniture. Don't wait up." As the door closed behind him, a tear slipped down my cheek. I looked at my son, his big eyes staring up at me trustingly, and at my growing belly, carrying another child I already loved deeply. I was left alone once again with only my thoughts, my love for my children, and a feeling that things were slipping further out of my control. As my 7th month of pregnancy rolled around, I found myself preparing for Thanksgiving. Guests started arriving in the afternoon. My parents came early, my mom immediately rolling up her sleeves to help in the kitchen. Friends and relatives trickled in, filling our home with chatter and laughter. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Nathan, Michael's younger brother, and to everyone's surprise, he had a woman with him. "Everyone, this is Victoria," Nathan announced, beaming. "My fiancé." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in congratulations. I plastered on a smile, trying to ignore the twinge of jealousy at the way Michael's eyes lit up at the sight of his brother's happiness. Eleanor arrived shortly after, her eyes widening as she took in Victoria. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with approval. "Aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Throughout dinner, Eleanor fawned over Victoria, peppering her with questions and hanging on her every word. I tried to focus on being a good hostess, but I couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "So, Victoria," Eleanor said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear, "Nathan tells me you're a manager at National Bank. How prestigious." Victoria nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, I've been there for about 5 years now." Eleanor beamed. "You must be doing very well for yourself. Unlike some people who can only pop out babies and breed poverty," she added, throwing a pointed look in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. My mother tensed beside me, ready to speak up, but I placed a hand on her arm, silently pleading with her not to make a scene. "You know," Eleanor continued, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Victoria here makes $155,000 a year. Now that's the kind of daughter-in-law I've always dreamed of. Smart, beautiful, successful." Tears pricked at my eyes as I remembered the years I'd spent supporting our family, paying the mortgage, building a career I was proud of. All of that seemed forgotten now. "I think we should continue this lovely evening somewhere more suitable," Eleanor announced, standing up. "Victoria, dear, why don't we all go to that new restaurant downtown? My treat, of course." Before I could process what was happening, Eleanor, Michael, Nathan, and Victoria were heading for the door. Michael didn't even glance back at me as they left. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the festive mood thoroughly ruined. One by one, they made their excuses and left, leaving only my parents behind. They offered to help me clean up, but I insisted they didn't need to. Finally alone, I sank onto the couch and let the tears flow freely. Hours passed as I sobbed, my hand resting on my swollen belly, wondering how my life had come to this. It was nearly dawn when I heard the front door open. Michael stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. He didn't say a word as he made his way to the bedroom. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and opened social media. There they were, Eleanor, Michael, Nathan, and Victoria grinning for selfies at an expensive nightclub. The caption read, "Best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." As my due date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The doctors had scheduled my C-section, insisting it was the safest option given that it had been less than 3 years since my last one. I tried to focus on preparing for our new arrival, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Michael. One chilly winter afternoon, I found him unpacking bags full of summer clothes. "What's all this?" I asked, puzzled. Michael shrugged, barely meeting my eyes. "Just saw a good sale. Thought I'd update my wardrobe." It didn't make sense, but with the impending birth occupying my thoughts, I pushed my suspicions aside. I'd been meticulously saving money in a separate account, determined to take a couple of months off work to recover and bond with our new baby. My workplace had approved 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a relief. I'd set aside enough for the mortgage, bills, and even a babysitter for our 3-year-old. For once, I felt prepared. 3 days before my scheduled C-section, chaos erupted. I was resting on the couch when Michael burst through the door, Eleanor hot on his heels. "Hurry up!" Eleanor barked as Michael rushed to our bedroom. I struggled to my feet, waddling after them. Michael was throwing clothes into his suitcase, the summer clothes he'd bought. "Michael," I said, my voice rising with panic, "what are you doing?" He barely glanced at me. "Nathan's getting married in the Maldives. We're all going." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What? But my C-section is in 3 days. Who's going to take care of our son?" Michael zipped up his suitcase, finally meeting my gaze with cold indifference. "You'll manage. You always do." Before I could respond, he brushed past me, Eleanor ushering him out the door. The door slammed, leaving me in stunned silence. Reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I scrambled for my phone, my hand shaking as I checked our joint account. Empty. All the money I'd saved, gone. With trembling fingers, I dialed Michael's number. He answered on the final ring. What? He snapped. The money, I choked out. All our savings. Where is it? There was a pause, then a cold laugh. We needed it for Nathan's wedding gift. Don't be so greedy, Emily. The line went dead. A sharp pain lanced through my abdomen. I looked down in horror to see a puddle forming at my feet. My water had broken. Panic seized me. I couldn't go into labor now. The risk to my previous C-section scar was too great. With one hand on my belly and the other clutching my phone, I called emergency services. The hospital was chaos, doctors shouting, machines beeping. I woke hours later to the gentle beeping of monitors. My mother's tear-stained face swam into view. Emily, she whispered, squeezing my hand. You're okay? The baby's okay. Slowly, the fog lifted. I'd nearly died. My baby had nearly died. But we'd made it. 3 days after the emergency C-section, I was feeling surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors were pleased with my recovery and gave me the green light to go home. Michael hadn't called once since he'd left for the Maldives. Not to check if I was alive, not to ask about his new son. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. I called my parents and asked to stay with them for a while. Their response was immediate and supportive. My parents doted on both boys, giving me time to rest and recover. I started researching divorce lawyers and gathering documentation of our finances. Then, exactly a week after I'd left the hospital, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail twice before finally answering on the third call. Where the hell are you? Why aren't you at home? Michael's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I took a deep breath. I'm at my parents', Michael, with both of our sons. I filed for divorce. There was a moment of stunned silence, then a bark of laughter. Divorce? Are you kidding me? After everything I've done for you? Everything you've done? I felt a surge of anger. You mean like abandoning me right before I gave birth? Or stealing all our savings? Oh, get over it, he scoffed. I'll pay you back, no problem. In fact, I don't even want to see you again. You know why? I said. Because I'm going to be rich. He launched into a tirade about how Nathan's new wife had offered him a job as her deputy at the bank, how they were going to start their own financial company, how she was going to make them all wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. You never believed in me, Emily, he spat. You always shot down my ideas, always held me back. Well, guess what? I'm free now. And you're just a loser who can't see potential when it's right in front of her. The divorce was finalized faster than I had expected. Michael didn't contest any of the terms. He returned the money he'd taken from our accounts and agreed to pay alimony. When it came to the house, I had all the mortgage statements showing I'd been the one making payments, and the judge ruled in my favor without hesitation. The day I moved back into the house with my boys, Michael was there, packing the last of his things. He sneered at me as I walked in, holding our baby and with our toddler clutching my hand. Enjoy this dump while you can, he said, carrying a box. I'll be in a mansion soon, swimming in cash. You'll see what you missed out on. As he left, the door closing behind him, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The house suddenly felt brighter, more peaceful. 1.5 years had passed since the divorce. Life had settled into a new normal. I had returned to work and found a balance between career and motherhood. It wasn't always easy, but we were doing well, and more importantly, we were happy. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, I received a news alert that made my stomach drop. Local banker exposed as fraud, leaves family in ruins. The article detailed an elaborate scam involving Victoria, Nathan's wife, who had convinced Michael, Nathan, and Eleanor to take out enormous loans to fund a non-existent financial company. They even mortgaged Eleanor's house and poured all their savings into it, only to find out Victoria wasn't a banker at all. She had created a fake office in a short-term rental as setup for her con. Victoria disappeared with millions, leaving a trail of forged documents and broken dreams. The article continued to reveal that they had also taken out additional loans to fund Nathan and Victoria's extravagant Maldives wedding, the very wedding Michael had chosen over being with me and our newborn. As I read, a mixture of emotions washed over me: shock, confusion, and, if I'm being honest, a small sense of satisfaction. The consequences were catastrophic. Unable to pay off their debts, they lost everything: Eleanor's house, their cars, even their personal belongings, all seized by creditors. Eleanor was reportedly forced to take a job as a cashier just to afford a tiny apartment and food. Michael and Nathan were also drowning in debt, their dreams of wealth shattered. I felt immense relief that I had divorced Michael when I did. My children and I were safe, untouched by the financial collapse that had torn apart my ex-husband's family. Just when I thought it was all behind me, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. Hesitating, I answered the call. Emily, her voice was small, so different from her usual imperious tone. We need your help," she pleaded, asking if they could stay with us. "The children need their father and grandmother," she insisted. "You can't leave family in trouble." I took a deep breath, memories flooding back: the Thanksgiving humiliation, the abandonment before my C-section, the countless times they belittled me. "Family?" I said, my voice steady. "You weren't concerned about family when you left me alone, pregnant, and in danger. You weren't concerned about family when you stole my savings. You weren't concerned about family when you called me a loser." Eleanor tried to interrupt, but I cut her off. "I'm sorry you're in this situation, Eleanor, but I'm not responsible for the choices you, Michael, and Nathan made. My priority is my children, and I won't expose them to the chaos you've created. Please don't contact me again." I hung up and immediately blocked her number. As I set my phone down, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. Truly over. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to break free from toxic relationships, even when it felt like everything you knew was falling apart? Emily's world fell apart when her husband, Michael, abandoned her during her pregnancy to attend his brother's wedding, only to later betray her with a financial scheme that shattered their family. Despite the humiliation and pain, Emily found strength and independence. She divorced Michael, took control of her life, and rebuilt a future for herself and her children. When the truth about Michael and his family's financial downfall emerged, Emily's resilience proved to be her greatest asset. The once broken family now faced the consequences of their own choices, while Emily remained empowered and focused on her children's well-being. Looking at Emily's journey from the lens of self-empowerment, it's clear that her greatest strength wasn't just her ability to overcome hardships, but her courage to reclaim control over her life. Despite Michael's betrayal, Emily chose not to let her circumstances define her. She didn't seek revenge. Instead, she focused on her own growth and the safety of her children. By prioritizing herself and rejecting the toxic behavior of her ex-husband and his family, Emily modeled the power of setting boundaries and protecting one's peace. This decision to cut ties with her past was not just an act of self-preservation, but a declaration that her future would be built on her own terms, free from the chaos and manipulation that had once been her reality. Have you ever had to make a tough call to break free from a toxic relationship? What did that decision teach you about yourself? What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? How do you think her decision to prioritize herself and her children reflects the importance of setting boundaries, even with family? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Let's talk about the power of choosing yourself in the face of adversity.